snow pelted relentlessly against Hilda's face, like tiny daggers made of ice. She pulled at the frayed shawl wrapped around her shoulders and held the ends tight against her chest. The rapid decline of temperature was indication that the sun had, having already dipped behind the treetops, provided its last warmth for the day. The forest was unusually quiet, as most wildlife had most certainly gone into hiding after the commotion. Somewhere, close by in fact, was a cobblestone path that led up to a small, cozy cottage in which she had spent most of her days. Somewhere else, most likely, even closer, stood an intruder, observing Hilda like a predator would its prey. In the stillness, she listened for anything that might give her an indication of the intruder's location, but detected nothing one way or the other. In those moments, she wasted a lifetime standing perfectly still, as if one of the many pines that outlined the edges of the property. Her ears met with silence, save for the sound of her own soft breathing. Despite this, Hilda was certain the intruder was nearby, as she could smell the sickly sweet scent of perspiration that only adrenaline and fear could produce. The silence was broken by the sound of crunching leaves, made beneath footsteps falling in rapid succession. Hilda, against instinct, stumbled towards the approaching sounds, arms outstretched. Suddenly her head involuntarily snapped back, her forehead immediately throbbing from the impact. Another blow, this time to her right shoulder, ignited a sense of panic as she quickly retreated from her attacker. Directionless and clumsy, red-hot pain traveled up Hilda's arms and her neck as she came in contact with something solid, the force sending her to the forest floor on hands and knees. The howling of what sounded like a woman's voice was close, very close. After several minutes, Hilda realized that the voice was her own. Instinctually, she covered her mouth and whimpered into her hands. When she finally managed to calm herself, she found that silence had once again returned to the woods, save for the soft pattering of the snow sifting down the branches above. Perhaps the intruder was nearby, timing out another attack. Perhaps not. A long time ago, sight would have been Hilda's most reliable aid. Now she had only familiar, but I hate this word, familiarity and intuition to rely on. At that moment, her intuition was telling her that fear and panic had put her dangerously close to being completely and utterly lost. She lifted her right arm with some difficulty. It was tender, but most likely not broken. At the top of her head, a thick knot had begun to swell, and her forehead was covered in wetness that ran down her nose and onto her chin. She slid her tongue around her mouth and noted gaps where teeth had once been, now replaced by sticky, metal-tasting substance that could only be blood. Feeling the ground for roots and following it up the base of the tree, she ran her hand to the left, then to the right to estimate its width. The tree proved to be thick, which meant she was at the outer perimeter of the clearing. Too much further in the wrong direction, she might forever be lost in the woods. Hilda used the tree as leverage to slowly regain composure. Once on her feet, she stood in the silence once more, listening for any indication that her assailant was near. The dizziness and pounding of her head were of no help. She listened but heard nothing. She breathed deeply, but the icy air was absence of the intruder's scent. Instead, she caught traces of peppermint and fudge, a treat she had been in the midst of preparing when all the commotion had started. Hilda released a deep sigh, not one of relief but of anger, and began limping in the direction of her cottage. In all of her time in these woods, she's never been so vulnerable as she'd been on this night. With each step, the aroma intensified, signaling she was nearing the cottage. Hilda couldn't help but smile at herself despite her anger. I might be old, but I'm one tough cookie, she thought to herself. A soft chuckle escaped her lips as the crunch of freshly fallen snow beneath her feet gave way to the cobblestone path that led back to the cottage entryway. The girl had fled into the woods, never to return. Of this Hilda was most sure. And good luck to you, Missy, she said aloud, for there were far stranger things hidden amongst the trees than an old lady in a gingerbread cottage. Hilda's smile faded briefly as she thought of her winter shed, nearly barren of its usual store of treats and baked breads. Children were becoming more difficult and less trusting, as the fresh gash on her head had proved. Never mind all that. If trust was no longer strong enough to keep a child in her kitchen when a cage ought to do the trick, then a cage ought to do the trick. Hilda's smile cracked into a wide grin. Yes, a cage will work splendidly. She plucked a peppermint button from one of the nearby gingerbread men lighting the cobblestone path, and absent-mindedly bit into it as she re-entered the cottage.